Okay, so now most of this is based on chapter 7, which discusses the typical disfluencies and the development of stuttering. So we'll speak about what is typical disfluency, is like, and the stuttering during the early stages, how it begins to emerge, and the different types or the different phases, including the borderline. I mean, first displaying the typical disfluencies more frequently than the average child, the same kinds, but more frequently. That is the very beginning. And then the borderline is a transition when the stuttering continues and then some things begin to stick. And then beginning stuttering is when you go and say, well, this is stuttering. It is almost likely to stay. And then intermediate and then advanced. All of these are tied to age as the age, the child develops. And luckily, many of the children go out of that with treatment and they improve greatly. Before we begin, we'll look at some concepts. For example, um, terminology that we use. There's a within the word disfluencies. So you have the word like. That is a word within this boundary. So if you say lie, that is lie like, you have broken the word. So that is a disfluency that comes within the boundary of the word. And this is compared to fluencies that come in between. I mean, disfluencies, that come in between a word and another, or a syllable and, no, a word and another. Like when you say, I like, um, uh, so that is in between. And so they they include part word repetition. Take a single piece of the word. The reason we say part word and we don't tend to make it like a single sound is that when you break a sound from a word, oftentimes you have to put a vowel there. Even if you say words like t, for example, if the person says when you say you cannot say the t unless you activate it with a vowel that comes after. So this is why it becomes, part word. So, and then prolongations, we said, keep in mind that the DSM, it just says prolongations and it says just simply meaning you spend longer to say a sound. And it doesn't discriminate any kind of sound, like continuous or not. And then according to the DSM classification, blocks are included as a kind of prolongation. It doesn't matter for us. In the end, we have prolongations of the sounds that are continuous. You can produce them like shh or s. These are, you can elongate them, you can make them longer. And then we have the blocks that definitely shut the airway down. The air can't go out. And these are the stops. So also we have stuttering like disfluencies. These are the common ones, and that they exist in the speech of people who stutter and who do not stutter. And they include even blocks, even blocks. I mean, once in a while, occasionally someone might just block at something, but it's not like a pattern. So there is a stuttering like includes short segment repetition, short segment, like of a word, part word repetition, monosyllabic whole word repetition, like a word that has a single syllable and the word is repeated, like good, good, good morning. So the whole word is repeated, and that's just a single syllable. And also prolongations and blocks. And then the term starter, a starter, is a word or sound that is used by the person who stutters to get started speaking. For example, or when there's a block. or when the person expects or anticipates uh, then we have this rhythmic phonation, and that is phonation or a sound, especially when it is maybe sound prolongation, like so, so you stop and continue it. You prolong it, but stop and then continue after stopping to prolong it. So, and that causes an irregular, the air pressure, and the whole thing like pause and go, pause and go. And these are the definitions for part word repetition and examples: single syllable word repetition, monosyllabic, multisyllabic, phrase repetition, interjection is these are the non-meaningful linguistic, non-linguistically meaningful insertions, like um, revision or incomplete phrases, like I lost my, and then you abandon and then move, create something new. Prolongations and tense pauses. In terms of levels now, borderline stuttering is usually occurs between age 2 years and 3.5. So that is the typical beginning when the child now should be saying, like making multi word combinations, and that is the time when the majority of the kids who begin stuttering at that time, whether they continue stuttering or they develop, or they go through spontaneous recovery. So at that time, their speech is characterized by more frequent part word repetition, like, and also monosyllabic word repetitions. Because they at that stage, they have many single words that are simple, yet they at that time the child is not aware of the problem. So that idea of anxiety, fear, stress is not yet there. And the beginning stuttering stage is from 3.5 to about 6 years. And then this is characterized by greater tension and more rapidly occurring disfluencies. La, 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 like the disfluencies come very quickly. And then the repetitions and prolongations also are there. And then some of them exhibit blocks and avoidance behavior. That's like the beginning that they begin. Not all, but just this is the period of time. And you can imagine if the environment is negative, you probably are going to have this earlier. The intermediate is during the school age. Now the child has gone through borderline, continued to stutter, beginning stuttering, and now intermediate entered into school stuttering. And now the child comes with a big baggage, a lot of experiences, negative or whatever. So the child now has been living with the problem for years. So there will be frequent repetitions, prolongations, and blocks, and the child is aware and experiences fear and anxiety. And then the severe is the about 14 years, teenage, about 14 years old, and goes through adult. And in that case now, stuttering is quite ingrained. There's frequent avoidance behavior and other ways to cope with blocks. Secondary behaviors are quite more intense. And again, we are assuming all of this without treatment yet. When we look at the evaluation, like what you did with the observation that you did of someone who stuttered, a big piece. Everything is based on counting the syllables, counting the words, getting a percentage, knowing how many disfluencies occur. That can be done in two ways, or there are two ways, not necessarily excluding each other. One is looking at the percentage of disfluencies. That is what you did when I gave you the assignment. Another one is to look at the amount. The amount refers to the number of disfluencies per 100 words or syllables. Some experts use, or some clinicians use words, count like in an utterance, use whole words, and some use syllables. So both of them are there, but if you use syllables, you will be more accurate. And the test that you will use is going to dictate what to use, okay? Because that is, and we'll be using the most common one is the stuttering severity index, which we have here, and we have the fourth edition. So we'll practice with it and know exactly how to do these calculations and how to diagnose. So the disadvantage if you count words, you're gonna underestimate. You're going to get a different lower number of disfluencies. So, for example, the word dinosaur is a single word. So if someone says dinosaur, now there are more than one disfluency, but if you combine it as just one word, counted as one word, they are only going to have just a single disfluency for that word. So the when you say amount, imagine that you have um, a bunch of beans, beans in a little bowl, my cereal bowl. You have some beans there, and you want to count them, but someone came and dumped some rice in there. Yeah, for a few grains of rice. They are not supposed to be there. So when I say to you count the amount, you are going to say count the amount what you have. You are going to get the beans themselves. You say I have 10 beans and I have 4 grains of rice. So for every 10 beans, you're gonna have 4 grains of rice. That is like, so now if I ask you a percentage, how many pieces did you have? You're gonna say, okay, there's 10, there's 4, I have 14. And then you divide 4 by, so how much percent do you have that is rice and how much? I don't want to complicate it, but the idea is if you have 100 utterances, and the stuttering and the disfluencies and everything there is gonna be added to the 100. The 100 words that should be said, how they are, they should be said. Then you take anything that doesn't belong there and say, okay, I had in the sample maybe 1200. I had in the sample 120 uh, syllables, everything. Okay, but 20 of them are the disfluencies, and the words themselves are 100. So the rate will be for every 100, you have a certain number of disfluencies. And if you say percentage, no, you add everything together and extract the disfluencies, divide by the total, and then you can get that estimate. So the amount, again, when we do the calculations using our test, you are going to get a very, very clear image about picture of what you are going to do. So the typical disfluency and the development of stuttering, the typical disfluencies, again, are things that you and I once in a while might do, might produce, but we don't do this as a pattern. It could be like I just did. uh, um, what do they call it? Uh, uh, when something is on the tip of your tongue and you can't say it. It could be, for example, a slip of the tongue. So the idea is for people who stutter, it is a pattern. It happens, more likely it will happen again, and it keeps happening again. And in the same way, in a similar way, it just becomes more frequent, it becomes worse. So the typical disfluencies include four types. These are again found in the speech of stutterers and non-stutterers. Repeating a whole word and repeating part of a word. That whole word can be a single syllable or multiple syllables, and also includes part word repetition. I like I wanted, like I said. So that is the average speaker. You will find them making some of these fine once in a while. So the next one is the idea about that repetition. Usually it is one time, occasionally it is two times, and that is still okay. And we are not just speaking about adults, we are speaking about kids, we are speaking about very young kids, 2-year-olds and up. And then revisions, that is when you start something and then you just reverse course and restart again. I wanted, okay, I didn't complete. Do you have a piece of gum? Okay, so I want it, and then instead of saying, and so I just back up and then ask the question in a different way. Interjections and incomplete phrases. Just making a, like, the difference between the revision and the incomplete phrase is you make the phrase the incomplete and stop. Don't even try to continue to find another sentence. So in younger children who stutter between ages 2 years and 4 years, um, the typical disfluencies are more prevalent. In other words, the ones 1, 2, 3, 4 that I just explained here, they tend to be more prevalent in the speech of the kids who are beginning to um, like between 2 and 4 in general. And then um, the just because again of this, they're practicing and exploring with language and stuff like that. So some studies also show that interjections and revisions and whole word repetitions are the most common kinds of these disfluencies. So interjections, revisions, and whole word repetitions, these are tend to be even the more common ones among these four. So what would they look like, the typical disfluencies in at the beginning? So they go between a year and a half to 6 years, and they share these characteristics. We say a year and a half because even though 18 months is the time when children begin combining, whereas there are kids who actually even start so early. One of the cases in the textbook is a child who started 12 months and he was started to combine. So it confirms that as they begin to combine two words to make multi-word combinations, this is where the system becomes overburdened. So anyways, the typical disfluencies change as the child grows. They change in the frequency, they change in like one becomes more dominant than the others and so on. So, but at that time, the child is not aware and there's no seemingly there is no stress, no fear, or secondary behaviors, because secondary behaviors are thought to result from the fear and anxiety. There's also not more than 10 disfluencies per 100 words. So, and 10, again, 10 is a lot, but uh, it cannot exceed more than 10. And that these 10 have to be of the kinds that we described. They don't have true stuttering disfluencies among them. So the repetitions are one time mostly, but occasionally two times. Like I say, I like to read. That is more typical. But occasionally I say I like to read. But once it goes three times and more, then it becomes more characteristic of real stuttering. So as the typical disfluent child between 2 years and 3.5, now we're moving from 1.5 years, from 2 years to 3.5. Now this child continues to mature and to get into that growth spurt, language, vocabulary, and all of this. And then um, the revisions and the phrase repetitions, they start to increase gradually because of the increasing linguistic demands. So these are the ones, the revisions starting and then stopping and starting again, and the phrase repetition. I want, for example. So these increase. That is fine. They are longer chunks. They are not the worst thing. So these are the easiest way things to treat. But the frequency of them increase because the biggest challenge the child is working on now is syntax, combining these and assembling. That is natural. The interjections gradually decrease. And that's in the ones who are going to recover. Part word repetitions gradually decrease. So you look for these patterns, especially part word repetition. They should be decreasing. And if they happen to increase, that is a red flag. And of course, there's a window of time too. So now we look at the borderline. Now, imagine this child or another one, but what does it look when the child is borderline stuttering? So stuttering during this stage can be 1.5 years. That is again if the child is advanced in language and this has begun the multi-word stage. To 3.5, that resembles typical disfluencies, still borderline. But there are some differences that you need to watch for. And these are very important. These characteristics, they are great for screening, for making the diagnosis, for predicting. You want to know, is this the child who's going to be likely growing to be persistent or is going to be among the fortunate 85%? The disfluencies occur more often. So the same four characteristics, but they occur more than 10 times. So definitely more than 6 disfluencies per 100, but we are going to have now part of these 6, even though the other ones we said 10, but this 6 disfluencies per 100, some of these are going to be actually more specific to stuttering. So the proportion of stuttering like disfluencies relative to all disfluencies is 50% or more. In other words, let's say the child once or produces 100 words. These are the 100 they are looking for. And then 25 or 30 of them are disfluencies. I mean, added to these disfluencies. So you get these and leave the rest of the sample, only get the disfluencies. and say how many of these disfluencies, what is the percentage of these that is actually stuttering like, that is more specific. So that would be 50%, then that means the child is now borderline, meets the criteria. So the child may swing back and forth between periods of uh, typical disfluency, the four kinds that we mentioned, to periods of more frequent, more disfluencies. And the child also exhibits part word and monosyllabic word repetitions more frequently than others. So they're the same, but in some cases, I mean, they are more in frequency. Part word and monosyllabic word repetitions and prolongations occur more frequently also than revisions and interjections. So these are more specific, part word and monosyllabic. So in that case, the disfluencies are typically loose and relaxed. That's a big difference. There is no stress, no tension yet. The beginning stutter, 3.5 to 6 years usually. In most of the cases they develop gradually, but in some cases they just boom, something triggers it. There is a case that your author mentions, just like the case I saw, but I was surprised that he didn't um, look at it um, kind of more detailed. Just the idea is that the child was 3 years old and he had an allergy medication and started immediately, all of a sudden, stuttering. And we know if you have something that triggers it like this, and then you know it's the trigger and the child is 3 years old, and you change the medication, that problem must go away. So I was kind of hoping that we would expand on this. In my case, when the child stuttered for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, began February, when exactly in Massachusetts, when the pine allergens and stuff they start, and and when I know the parents reported, immediately I asked, is there any medication, any this, TB, whatever, did he fall? But it's nothing. The only thing is Zyrtec. And it turned out that this Zyrtec triggered it. And when especially it was changed, another medication, the child took it. Uh, 3 to 4 weeks, everything was gone, as if he never experienced it. So, I mean, if you know the trigger, that shouldn't be like, oh, this is a spontaneous recovery. It is not the same as the one who's growing and developing it. So, also, there will be tension and struggle because the child now, between 3.5 and even 3 and 4, the child becomes aware. And we are speaking up to 6 years now. So the tension and struggle starts to increase, and and the child obviously is struggling and emotionally is feeling the stress. So and then worse than that, the child is going to associate the negative experiences that accompany the stuttered moment. And whenever they would experience one of the two, that's classical conditioning, one of the two, like you're saying a word that is going to activate the stress, or the opposite way, one can activate the other. So just like Pavlov, when he started to demonstrate that with the piece of meat and the dog salivating, and then he rang the bell, and then the dog associated that. So ringing the bell, showing an image of the bell, showing anything that has to do with meat like this, it's gonna. So classical conditioning, and then eventually the child knows that if they got stuck on this word once, they know before they say it, oh, I'm gonna get stuck again, so I need to reverse course and make another sentence or make this, or maybe put something there, do something. So these start to to develop the secondary behaviors. And again, this is beginning stuttering. This is where the secondary behaviors now begin because the stress and the anxiety are quite in full bloom in that stage. So the core behaviors in that stage include repetitions that are more tense. Remember before in the borderline, more relaxed, similar to those who do not stutter. And the now beginners, the repetitions are more tense, there's more muscular tension, more rapid, and they have an irregular rhythm. Um, Final segment of a repeated syllable, of a repeated sound at the end of a syllable, the child is going to repeat that sound at the end of the syllable and is going to just make it like an abrupt ending. It sounds abrupt, just the way that the child would say it. So in the if the end sound is a vowel, that sound is going to be turned into ashwa. It will be made small. It's basically by like inserting at the end of it instead of the vowel. But vowel reduction, it makes the utterance is abrupt. Sometimes the stuttering is accompanied by a higher pitch and it has a pattern. So that the result of that, this results from the increased vocal fold tension because all muscles of your body are going to experience the tension. And when they contract and the vocal folds, how they increase their pitch is to elongate them. So initially, the rising pitch occurs at the end of a string of a repeated syllable, like when the child says, um, I lie, like, and at the end, the last piece of that repetition, then the pitch rises. And then eventually it appears earlier than the end. So it gets worse. Rising pitch within and in between the stuttered iterations seems to be a major definitive sign of beginning stuttering. So pitch is an indication added to the number of the of the pattern like this. And so instead of initially coming at the end here and the last lie, it is gonna start comes more early. Prolongations initially they affect the initial sound like smile, but gradually they can occur in the middle of the word. The continuing again core behaviors for the beginning stage, beginning stuttering. At the beginning, the child, as they continue, the uh, the the blocks begin to be more frequent, and they begin to replace repetition and prolongation. They become like predominant, and that's again beginning. So the blocks may overshadow other stuttering features. There are others are also there, but the blocks are very obvious because they result in struggling and blocking the airway and a lot of physical and facial features. So during this stage, the child begins to show a high frequency of core behaviors of stuttering like disfluencies, not just the ones everyone does, but they are gonna be more specific, and these are the typical ones. So part word repetitions, that's like individual sounds or syllable or parts of a word. Monosyllabic words, like prolongations? Can you smile? Broken words or hard glottal attacks? And that's usually when we say, I want to do it. So even if they don't block, they just kind of put more force into it. So these are highly predictable, persistent stuttering. If they come at that stage and the child has been stuttering like this for 12 months, that is very, I mean, it becomes very like a red flag, definitely. What about the secondary behaviors? These are the non-verbal, I mean, the physical, facial, body, um, uh, language, tension. So many secondary behaviors seem to be reflexive, but we are not quite sure. And some of them, at least, as soon as the person goes and they start, it's like a reflex, involuntary. But again, some are assumed to begin as an association, as a learned behavior due to the conditioning, classical conditioning learning. So these include eye blinking, squeezing, pressing the eyes, and increased muscle tension. Uh, at that stage, we are speaking about the beginning stage, the beginner stuttering stage. It is possible at that time to reverse the blocks, to reverse the eye blinks and the squeezing and all of these secondary features. It is possible to reverse them with treatment, of course. So then, if not, the child is going to start to develop escape behaviors. Remember, escape. I am already stuck. I want to find a way out. In the other one, avoidance is I am about to be stuck. I need to just avoid falling down into that ditch or into that, trap or whatever. I am avoiding the problem. So escape behaviors includes, for example, different ways to end the stuttering moment. And that occurs after several repetitions of a syllable. And it could include squinting, blinking, head nods, or interjections. It is assumed that through their experience, people who stutter, they do these things, and when they see they can somehow distract themselves or something, they make it easier to break out of a block or to stop the repetition, that they learn to use them more frequently, and then they become part of the problem. So these behaviors can begin during this particular stage, and they become more severe during the next stage, but they start during the beginning stuttering stage. And in terms of the attitude, the child is fully aware now, and the feelings of frustration are obvious, but they are not as strong as in later stages when the child practicing for more years and then still can't, and the problem just becomes worse. So that increases the frustration, and people's reaction doesn't help. So excessive muscular tension becomes obvious in the beginning again of the beginner stuttering stage, and this usually accompanies repetitions and prolongations, and also the rapid the repetitions keep happening rapidly. They accelerate at that stage, so um, that increases muscular tension. And as also some studies show that people who stutter, they tend to activate opposing muscle groups. Like you have two opposite cycles for respiration. You have inhalation muscles, they have to lift up the thorax. You have exhalation muscles that have to reverse the process. So, and especially when you talk, your abdominal muscles expiration are active. Your muscles that lower the thorax, the diaphragm goes up. So all these muscles are actively squeezing uh, to narrow, to increase the pressure in your lungs. Yet, while you are speaking, your inhalation muscles are still holding. They are not haven't relaxed fully to allow the thorax to collapse. So they are still holding. So that resistance now between uh, the muscles of expiration and muscles of inhalation uh, could be contributing, but more also the laryngeal muscles, adductors and abductors that would work against each other. And articulation muscles, they have to coordinate with each other. So that is one of the ideas, some of the studies. And then avoidance conditioning can also appear during the beginning stage. In other words, you engage in an avoidance behavior. Like I see I am gonna be asked by the teacher to talk or to say something, and I know that I'm gonna struggle. I'm afraid the kids are gonna do this and that. So I'm just gonna, as soon as I know this is the time that the teacher is gonna look and ask questions, I'm gonna ask to go to the bathroom. And every time the teacher said, I'm gonna, so that becomes conditioned. And every time the child, something like this happens, the child just, it becomes a program. Sometimes wouldn't even know that is the reason. Now we reach the school age, we reach kindergarten, and we go all the way to age 14. And this is where the intermediate stuttering school age stage the child now has been, going through stage by stage, and the situation is more aware, and the situation is worse. So this is a table actually, and I have the information here, but I could not um, write anything. This is an image. So the core features include behaviors, for example, including blocks. And these blocks, just the airway just shuts down. And then after, the person will be struggling and shaking, and the face will show grimacing. And they will also probably have many repetitions and prolongations. The child uses escape behaviors to terminate a block, and whatever works for a person might not work for the other, but there are some common ones. And when they know that, yeah, they work, then they keep using them and they become part of the stuttering. The child appears to anticipate the blocks and often uses avoidance behavior, and also anticipating difficult situations and starting to avoid these situations like socialization, parties, and wherever they feel that they're going to have more pressures. They fear the, the the situation, like they are afraid of the stuttering itself, and they feel the embarrassment and sometimes the shame, and sometimes the self-blame sometimes. So the secondary behaviors, again, the because of the awareness and the experiences in the past, that increases frustration, and the behavior avoidance and escape increase definitely. And then they even develop word avoidance behavior, like particular word that they know this is a word that they frequently stutter at. They know they are going to say it, they start to stop, and it creates other disfluencies. Um, the child may try to avoid talking in class or in situations where he or she knows that they will be under pressure. They may pretend to be busy, maybe slouching on a desk or pretending to go to the bathroom, or maybe just trying to think, pretending to think, to avoid these moments. So feeling and attitudes At that time, again, they're very, I mean, awareness begins between 3 and 4 years. But by the time they are in the intermediate stage, they are quite, they have a lot of negative experiences. So the child learns to anticipate stuttering on specific words, and the speech therapist again will be able um, to really enhance their skills, and to at that, even at intermediate stage, will make a difference by teaching them the strategies, by teaching them many techniques that you will learn. And also, without treatment, the child may develop even more secondary behaviors. Going to be worse, like stiffness, I mean, and signs of struggle that will create intense feelings of embarrassment and shame. And then we now reach the advanced stage, and that is older teens, 14 and to the adult. So there are a lot of secondary behaviors now. So many of the same words and situational avoidance behaviors, for example, that the person knows particular words, I'm going to stutter on them, and they now have learned these behaviors that they think or associate with opening a block or managing to avoid a certain situation. Um, the avoidance behavior is more extensive. They do a lot of it. They just increase, and avoiding work may be sometimes gasping for breath as they start speaking, pretending to think, or trying to, for example, um, uh, to kind of find some alternatives to just, again, avoid getting into the stuttering situation. And this is a summary. So the most frequent core behaviors are longer, tense blocks, often, remember, 5 seconds or longer, often with tremors around the lips and the tongue and the jaw. The person will also probably have repetitions and prolongations. Stuttering may be suppressed in some individuals through extensive avoidance behavior. That means you can teach them to relax and to make these hard stutters more loose, and also if they can suppress it this way, you can teach them healthier ways so that they can actually suppress them, these disfluencies, in a relaxed way without creating a lot of tension. Complex behaviors of avoidance and escape behaviors, they characterize, that are main characteristics of this advanced stage. And this may be very rapid and um, habituated, like the person is used to them, they become part of their system, and they might not even become aware of these things anymore. The emotions of fear, embarrassment, and shame are very strong, and the individual has negative feelings about themselves. They might even project these negative feelings onto others to say, they look at me as stupid, they think that this and that. So, which is not always the case. So, this is a summary of the typical disfluencies: the borderline stuttering, beginning stuttering, intermediate, and advanced stuttering. This is again from the textbook. These are the core behaviors, secondary, and feelings and attitudes, and underlying processes. These are the ones that we discussed about the brain and the environment and